Hey, what's going on? This is Coach JJ, and today I'm going to talk about two versions of the snap. You might have heard this in maybe some karate schools. You might have heard it in some like boxing. But what a snap is essentially a way to utilize your technique to gain power, to gain speed. Okay. Now, the analogy comes from what weapon is the fastest weapon outside of a gun, right? Because the gun is the weapon, the bullet is the projectile, right? But if you had a handheld weapon, what's the fastest weapon? Okay, it is, I'll save you the trouble, it's a whip. Okay, what happens with the whip? When I throw it out there, it's loose at the end. Throw it out there and I snap it, it goes pa. You hear that pop, that very loud pop. That's what we're going to try to aim for when we're snapping. Now, if you have the traditional gi on, you'll see a lot of people, sometimes a little bit thicker, sometimes it's a little thinner. But every time that I move and I snap and I'm trying to pop out, okay, you might hear the gi go pop on its own. It's not going to be, obviously, it's not as loud as a whip, but your goal is to try to get to that, okay? But there are two different types of snap, but they utilize the same type of technique. I'm try not to move the mic so much on this. All right, I'm going to use punches from this just because it'd be a lot easier, but you utilize the same sort of idea with kicks. Okay, so the same principle applies. Okay, so first one is the snap back. All right, this is a real easy one. Everyone usually does this. You'll see this a lot. So my snap back is if I'm using a jab cross or just a jab, all I'm doing is snapping it out and snapping it back. All right, I'm going out, back in. That's my snap back. Generally, in general, doesn't mean it's always going to be that way. Wherever my port of origin is, I'm going to go right back to that position. Okay, because generally it's going to be in a cover position or in whatever position that I started from. Okay, there might be an angle changes, especially for kicks. So I might land up front, I might land off to the side, I might angle out. But for the most part, I'm going to come out, come back in wherever I'm at. Same thing happens if I have a weapon. I could snap it out, snap back from there. Okay, but in order for me to get that snap back, I have to understand that not everything is tight moving forward. So if you looked at our video on tense body training, that's a way to create neurological connections, your neurons in your muscles to get to that good sort of extension from there. We're not working on that. Okay, this one we're going to stay nice and loose. We're still going to follow the same path, so that strike path going straight out. Make sure we have good technique. I'm going to stay loose. Even if I'm turning it out, I'm going to turn out and tighten at the end, and then I'm going to be loose all the way back. Now, this type of technique, again, creates that snappy motion. If you do have a gi on, try it. If you're super tense, you're like, it doesn't work the same way. You might get a little bit of that sound, but it's nowhere near what's going to happen if you actually snap and pop it the way you're supposed to. Okay, so that's snap back again. Point of origin, loose, tight, loose, back. Pop, pop. Okay, that's a snap back. And the second type is something called a lockout. And again, you might have heard this a lot more with kicks, but you see this a lot in karate, a lot of form stuff when they start throwing punches, bam, and they'll come out and lock it out there. Now, there is a misconception that happens. I always tell people whenever you lock out on extension, even on the snapbacks, it doesn't matter what version of it, I don't want to be completely out. I'll always want to have a slight bend, okay? The reason for this is if I'm completely extended, I could pop that elbow up and I'm really hitting joint end range of motion from that, like extreme end range of motion. Some people are even hyper flexible. I just had a student, I noticed that her arm would actually bend a little bit further, and that's counterintuitive to stacking our joints, making sure we have a good extension. So when I lock out at the very end on that tension, I'm actually going to have a slight bend in that. So every time I hit, boom, I'm always going to have that, just that little itty bit of slack. And it's not slack, I don't want to call it slack, so I'm locking out into this position. Okay, so same thing, if I'm doing a jab, or cross, doesn't matter, if I pop, boom, I lock out, and I'm not doing it on target so you guys can see. Okay, I'm locking out that slight bend from there. Okay, and again, you can use for practically any technique. Where it gets a little hairy is in those rounded shots like a hook punch. I'm coming in, I'm loading, boom, here, okay? I can technically lock out, pop, and then come back through. I can fall back here or reverse it coming back. So there are ways you can utilize this for your rounded strikes as well. And kicks, it's a lot easier because when you, like say roundhouse, I'm coming up, my roundhouse comes up, I extend, I can lock out up front if I'm doing control and I'm trying to maintain this whole sideways position right from there, rather than say a Muay Thai version where I'm actually swinging through. Okay, I can lock it out from here for that control, pull it back in and recoil. Okay, so that recoil, again, it utilizes the same technique. I'm loose, 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 tight. The lockout is it stops for like a second or so at the very end. So if you practiced, I believe I had it in our basics, those horse stance punches. From here, shoulders are down, pop. Okay. If you have a gi, try to get that popping sound. Again, I can add power by utilizing my body a little bit more, but loose. From here, I'm tight. Everything's loose, pop. Everything's loose, pop. Now, another principle for this is however fast it comes out is as fast it comes back in. Obviously, you can't do that for the lockout, but you still want to utilize that same sort of principle to reinforce it. That means if I go out this slow and I lock out, I'm going to come back that slow to make sure that my mind, somewhere in my subconscious, that program, that active reprogram that we're trying to do, goes, okay, I went out that fast, I got to come back that same speed. Okay. The idea behind this is when I snap back, pop, pop, that's how I get the same popping motion. So I cannot go out and loose. Like I can't go fast and then slow back. You will still get the popping sound, obviously not as loud, just by coming out here, keeping the same speed as it goes back. Remember, the acceleration happens at the end. It's called an amateurization phase in weightlifting, where it's like that little extension and then it's going to switch to come back. Okay, the less time that I have in that, that's where the pop happens. Okay, so being able to practice that snap back, boom, or that lockout, bam, out here. Remember, small bend every single time. Same technique, loose, 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 tight, loose, 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 back. Okay, practice that for all of your techniques. Okay, there's rarely any techniques where it's going to require to be tight all the way through. In fact, a lot of the striking stuff, you're going to be in here nice and loose, boom, tightening at the end, trying to lock in position. Okay, another thing you can focus on is try to get a still motion. So when you pop out, try not to at the end, just still. All right. How I use this with my entire body is everything moves at once, everything stops at once if I'm going to lock out. Okay, and even that little amortization phase, okay, everything moves at once, pop, boom, everything stops at once. Even if I'm out here, everything moves forward at once, everything pulls back at once, and then I stop. Okay, so you still have that. Move forward all at once, move back all at once, stop at once. Your whole body moves as one. Okay, and those are our two types of snaps: our snap back, popping out back in, and our lockout coming out from here. You'll get the same sort of concept with the snap of the gi sound. And again, that's why people like the gi. All right, is you can actually hear it as you're throwing your strikes, as you're throwing your blocks. All right, so practice that. Again, you may not get it right off the bat, but it just starts off with these little small things from here. Just keep practicing it. You will get better with it. It's all part of your training. And enjoy the process. Maybe you got a big snap, like, man, that was a good one. Then the next 7 are like, oh, man, that's horrible. That's all right. Take your win. Then try to increase how many times you do it. That's all we literally do. That's why you see it all the time in karate studios where they're just like punching the air. What are you punching the air for? I can guarantee you they're listening for that snap. They're focusing on their technique, trying to get a good technique so they can snap that gi. It's really, really satisfying. I do highly recommend it. Just go get a gi. You can buy one off of like Amazon or something like that. Find a dealer online and just have them send you a gi. My recommendation is try not to get the super thick ones like you find in jiu-jitsu, because that's meant for like grabbing. Jiu-jitsu or judo have like the really, really thick gis. You can still use it, but to get a good snapping motion, try to get some of the taekwondo ones, the karate ones. Those are really good ones. Okay, guys, so that's our snap back, and our lockout. Good luck training. See if you can utilize that into all of your training, and have a good one.